Call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 103 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. To prevent disruptive audio feedback incidents during our meeting, we kindly ask that all participants keep their earpieces away from any microphone. Audio feedback incidents can seriously injure interpreters and disrupt our proceedings. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Pursuant to the motion adopted on October 23rd, 2023, the committee resumes its study on the growing problem of car thefts in Canada. We have today two panels of witnesses. I would like to now welcome our witnesses for the first panel. Félix-Pierre Bergeron, Director, Port Protection and Business Continuity. Julien Baudry, Director, Public Affairs. Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. Anita Gill, Director of Health, Safety and Security. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Welcome to you all. I now invite Monsieur Félix-Pierre and Monsieur Baudry to make an opening statement, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a pleasure for me to be here to talk about a subject that's obviously very important to us. The Port Authority has 275 employees, and of course, we see crime as a part of our social responsibility. As you can imagine, Montreal is a major port in Canada, first and foremost for importing essential goods and exporting the best of what we have here, not for exporting the proceeds of crime. Over the course of a year, we receive and export around 36 million tons of goods. That's the equivalent of $151 billion passing through the Port of Montreal and represents 3.5% of Canada's GDP. It's important to know that these goods are carried in 1.7 million containers, and these containers generally transit through the port and are sometimes on site for 2 or 3 days. Therefore, the port, like all other Canadian port authorities, is first and foremost a transit area for goods. No container is filled here, and no container transits through here without being sealed before arrival. Certainly, Montreal is often mentioned in connection with vehicle exports, essentially for two reasons. We're very close to the major urban centers of Quebec and Ontario, and we are also the major container port when it comes to serving markets such as Africa and the Middle East, which have been identified by Interpol as destinations for these stolen vehicles. Obviously, we don't work alone. Our responsibility is limited. We work in collaboration with our partners, and that's why the recent investments announced within the Canadian Border Services Agency, but also the renewed collaboration with our partners in the police forces, enables us not only to improve security, but also to act on our responsibilities. Lastly, you can see that we don't want to stop there. We want to do more, and that's why we're delighted to be taking part in today's discussions. Under the Canada Marine Act, which gives us powers and obligations, we are responsible for ensuring that people and goods transiting through the port are safe and secure. We're talking about the goods. We're not talking, rather, about the goods inside the containers as we know them, but we're talking about the containers themselves. As a result, all accesses to the port are monitored and supervised 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All port access is monitored, supervised, and subject to identification. Although we don't have the authority to inspect containers, we have developed and supported a number of initiatives to help police forces and companies support their investigations and activities. Today, for example, in addition to the space we give to customs, we provide the space, buildings, and infrastructure for them to operate in. Over 800 police and customs officers have access to the port at all times, whether it's the RCMP, the Sûreté du Québec, the Service de Police de la Ville de Montréal, the SPVM or customs officers, they all have access to the port. Access cards have also been issued to these various agencies. In addition, over 600 cameras monitor the entire port. All these cameras are also available to police forces who use them for their operations. In addition, we work with private companies that monitor or track vehicles in the port using the famous TAG, Stolen Vehicle Tracking System. We've installed antennas for them, and they are on the ground in the port to identify or find out where the vehicles are located. We're currently reevaluating with them the options to see the number of antennas that could be upgraded or to capture signals more quickly and find precisely where the vehicles are. They currently have a few antennas, but if we add more, we'll be able to check more trains, trucks, and the location of goods. It's currently under development, but we're proud to be part of this initiative. We've also introduced a national program for anyone who has the technology that might be similar to this to reach out to us so that they can come and install their antennas free of charge. We're going to provide them with city or port infrastructure so that they can set up shop and operate free of charge. This recent program is underway, and we don't have any developments at the moment, but we're working on it. We've also had a lot of discussions, notably with the Automotive Industries Association of Canada, to try to understand or find other ways of facilitating their work in this crime wave of stolen vehicles we're currently experiencing. We must also take for granted that this is not just a problem at the Port of Montreal. It is happening, it's been identified, and we need to create an organization for all ports, all 17 port authorities in Canada, because if we don't, the problem will only move to another port, and we're open to discussions to find solutions moving forward.
Ms. Gill, an opening statement, please.
Thank you. Good morning, and on behalf of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee today. My name is Anita Gill. I'm the Port Security Officer and Director of Health, Safety and Security for the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. My experience prior to joining the Port Authority was over 18 years in law enforcement, working as a peace officer in all three different levels of government: municipal, provincial, and federal. I then joined the Port Authority just over 10 years ago, and I'm currently leading programs in safety, security, compliance, and administrative enforcement. As Canada's largest port, the Port of Vancouver is home to 29 major marine terminals across 5 business sectors, including 4 container terminals with a total annual capacity of 3 million TEUs. The port environment is a complex one, with many stakeholders contributing to the movement of goods to support Canada's trade. One of the many regulations governing marine security is the Marine Transportation Security Act and regulations, which outline the security roles and responsibilities within the marine environment. These regulations set out requirements for all port authorities and the requirements for independent marine terminal operators regarding the security of marine transportation and the protection of critical infrastructure. Each of the 17 Canadian port authorities are responsible for implementing security measures within its jurisdictional boundaries, exclusive of leased spaces. The responsibility for security within those leased spaces falls to each independent terminal operator that's entered into a lease with that port authority. The RCMP and CBSA are responsible for border protection and transnational crime, while municipal police agencies respond to calls for service from the terminals. And lastly, Transport Canada determines which categories of persons are required to have security clearances within the marine port environment. For the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority region, we have 29 different law enforcement and regulatory agencies that have a mandate on our port jurisdiction, and we have ongoing relationships with these agencies. Considering the complex environment that I've just outlined, I have a few suggestions for us to share collectively. Firstly, the Marine Transportation Security Act was introduced in 1994, and the regulations followed in 2004 after 9/11. This provided us with the legislative framework for the security of our marine transportation system in Canada. As the regulation is currently under review, we would like to provide input through ACPA for government consideration to potentially expand its focus to assist with some of the challenges that we're currently facing. Secondly, we know that port authorities are not responsible for the interdiction of criminal activity, which falls clearly to RCMP and CBSA. However, port security and port policing exist on a continuum. and enhanced information sharing between law enforcement and port authorities is essential. At the Port of Vancouver, we chair the committee called the PIMSWIG, which includes senior leadership from Regional Transport Canada, RCMP, CBSA, Vancouver Police Department, and Delta Police Department, as there are our two largest municipal police forces on port property. The committee allows for ongoing collaboration, and we've seen many joint successes over the years. So our second recommendation is for government to reinitiate the National Port Security Committee with ACPA and port authorities to allow for ongoing national collaboration on marine security and policing matters. For my third point, I think we can all agree that law enforcement agencies have an obligation to protect the jurisdiction in which they serve, and we appreciate they have multiple competing priorities to balance. Here in the Pacific region, the number one ask for our law enforcement partners at the PIMSWIG was for the Port Authority to share the inner workings of the Port of Vancouver, our terminal operations, our labor operations, trucking operations, and the supply chain environment. I'll share the wise words of a senior RCMP officer who said, "If we don't know what in place looks like, how are we going to detect something out of place?" That's Police Investigations 101. That really resonated with us at the FPA. So we worked with our labor partners, ILWU and BC Maritime Association, cruise and shipping partners, trucking and rail partners, terminal operators, and many other port partners. The two-day in-person course was co-created and endorsed by RCMP's Serious Organized Crime Pacific Region and CBSA Operations and Intelligence Pacific Region. It was delivered at a confidential level exclusively for peace officer members working at the Port of Vancouver. It was well received. So our third recommendation is that government consider similar national training for all law enforcement that have a jurisdiction within our 17 Canadian port authorities. So in closing, we at the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority are very pleased to see the leadership role the government has demonstrated through the recent National Auto Theft Summit and our subsequent engagement. We are encouraged by the recent meetings with Public Safety and Transport Canada and their collaboration with the VFPA and ACPA on the auto theft issue in our country. On behalf of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to provide input today. I will be happy to take any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Ms. Gill. We're going to move right into questions. So, Mr. Caputo, you're up first for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize to our witnesses today. This is my first meeting on this issue, so I apologize if some of my questions are a bit elementary because I'm just getting my feet wet here. I was struck by something that Mr. Bergeron said, and that is that all access points are monitored to the port. Is that correct?
Yep.
So theoretically, any stolen vehicle is going through one of these monitored access points.
Yep.
Do I have that right?
Yep.
Is there anything in place to figure out, like as a vehicle goes through, whether that vehicle is stolen?
The vehicle is inside. If there is a vehicle inside a container, it's inside the container. It cannot be seen, and the container is sealed, and we don't have the authority or the power to open the container to see what's inside. It belongs to the CBSA.
I'm sorry?
It belongs to CBSA.
Okay. And the containers are all going to be sealed typically before they arrive, is that right?
Yeah, they have to be sealed.
Okay. And in your experience, how often does CBSA go through those containers?
In my experience, I can't really say, but not much.
Not much?
No.
Okay. And the containers, are they, how big, how small are we typically dealing with here?
The containers?
Yes.
Either 20 foot or 40 foot.
Okay, so those are the
Those are two standard. There's some for 53, but they're rare. And they can fit 2 cars in the 20 foot or 3 cars in the 4 cars in the 40 foot.
Right. Now, at the point of entry, is it possible to determine what the actual cargo is? I assume not, because
No.
yeah,
We don't have access to that information.
yeah, okay. Now, Ms. Gill, you talked about the inner workings here and the necessity for training for peace officers. In your experience as somebody who's done a great deal of law enforcement, is there one aspect of law...
Sorry for the interruption. It's my understanding Parle View is not working and the audio is not being recorded. Can we just double check? Thank you.
Maybe they just thought they weren't missing anything. I met with me.
So,
My mother.
Just one moment, the clerk's going to give us an
so
explanation.
we are aware of the issue. Right now, the issue is with the English channel, but the channel for floor and French works, and we are technician working on it, and we are recording everything.
Can our members hear? The Zoom is still working? I'm worried about people online, right?
Mr. McKinnon?
I just want to make sure.
I can hear fine. Thank you.
We'll continue. Please continue.
Thank you. Ms. Gill, thank you for being here.
Your time there.
When it comes to, you talked about your third point, the inner workings, is there one specific aspect, both in your experience, law enforcement at all three levels, as well as your experience here, is there one specific aspect of training that should be targeted to our peace officers?
Thank you for the question. So what I can say on that is the general awareness and familiarity of how a Port Authority operates is a mystery to most people, including law enforcement. Going through the different levels of training that I received, there wasn't any specific training on a Port Authority, how it operates. It's a landlord port, how independent terminal operators are independent, and the Port Authority administration doesn't have a say on what happens on container terminals because they're independent. It's those types of context questions that I think need to be answered first, and then we can go into the inner workings. How is labor dispatched? How are the GPSs on our trucks? Where can they get that information from? How much of a notice does CBSA have on what's in a container? So there's many pieces of information for the supply chain on how it comes in to really avail to law enforcement for them to be able to have a better understanding, to be able to pick out those areas where they feel they can do more investigation.
Okay. Can I ask, just how long did it take for you to feel comfortable to get up before you got up to speed in your position? Just because you're talking about these layers of complexity, it sounds complex. I imagine it was at least months before you felt comfortable.
I'm still learning. I've been there 10 years.
Wow. Okay. So obviously people who don't know what they're dealing with, this could be tremendously challenging.
Yes.
One thing that I don't know if it was touched upon was the role of organized crime. In your experience, and this goes to anybody who wants to intervene from the committee, is this something that you just appreciate as present and understand as present, or is it something you actually see blatantly in front of you when it comes to auto theft and organized crime?
I'll go for an answer with that. We acknowledge there might be some criminal organization operating in the port. They're everywhere. All sorts of point of entry, be the airport, be the ports, be the land ports, being other organizations. They're present. They're part of the society. But what we've done in port over the years is manage the access and manage the identification of people working in the port, making it more difficult for them to operate openly in the ports. It doesn't mean they can't ne peuvent soudoyer quelqu'un, mais
it doesn't mean that they can't bribe someone.
Is being captured, being electronically or being by identification, being by the biometrics. So the ports is now more considered a conduit, not a destination for the criminality. So they do their stuff before the port and after the port. They don't do stuff in the port because the detection rates is too high for them.
That's very good to know. I assume I'm out of time here. Oh, I have about 40 seconds. Does anybody else want to intervene on that question?
Thank you. I agree with Felix Pierre's questions. I mean, we understand organized crime does exist. It exists any place where it can be used to facilitate the crime that they want to happen. It is here to stay. We just need to collectively figure out how we can all help minimize it.
Thank you. We're going to move to Mr. Gahir, please, for 6 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for appearing before the committee. My questions, at least initially, are for the Montreal Port Authority. We've heard your opening testimony, but why is it that the Port of Montreal is where most of the stolen vehicles that are leaving the country are exiting from? And since this problem has arisen, again, at a high scale at the Port of Montreal, what has the Port of Montreal specifically done to combat this problem?
Merci beaucoup pour votre question.
Thanks very much for that question. Well, basically, the Port of Montreal, which is the second largest container port in Canada, is the port that exports most of the freight to where the criminals can export these vehicles, so the Middle East, Africa. It's only 6 hours from Montreal, just a few minutes from urban Montreal. So to be very frank, because we perform so well and the flexibility with markets, that is, the trucks can come in and the boats go out, then the criminals take advantage of that to export these vehicles. So this is a problem we're very aware of. Over the past year, we have increased our efforts with our partners, and my colleague from the Port of Montreal, Port of Vancouver, talked about this. We are working closely with police services. We are working on communication, and we are working together more closely. We are also using technology to help us better identify containers that arrive in the port with a stolen vehicle. But I want to emphasize that we need to find solutions that work across Canada, because if the solution is only good for Montreal, then the criminals will just move their activities to other parts. So we are working through our association, but also we are working with our partners openly to find other solutions.
Well, the technology that you're using to search the containers, is that the Port of Montreal's technology, or is that CBSA's technology? Do they have their own? Do you guys use it in conjunction?
Technology.
It's the CBSA's technology.
En fait, si je peux me permettre, effectivement,
Well, all of the activities concerning inspection in the port or outside really comes under CBSA. But we are logistic partners. When a truck, for example, comes to the port, it can travel around for about 30 minutes and before being in the terminal, and then there is the inspection. So that's how we do that.
Online, and for folks in general, there's some confusion about jurisdiction as to what happens. There's the Port Authority, there's the CBSA, there's the local police of jurisdiction in that area, there's the police, perhaps the local jurisdiction where the car was stolen. I come from Peel Region in Mississauga, which is particularly hard hit by the car theft, the auto theft problem. So I guess I'm confused. If a car is stolen and is taken to the Port of Montreal, at that point, when the car is in a container at the Port of Montreal, can the local police, let's say Peel Police, can they come on their own, of their own volition, onto Port of Montreal property and search containers, or no?
We're not the better person to answer that question. You have to ask the different police of jurisdiction, because there's jurisdictional aspect of it, which we can't control. For us in the Port of Montreal, the only people allowed to open a container for inspection at either airport and export is CBSA.
You had also mentioned that it's CBSA and RCMP that have 24-hour access?
Yeah, they have 24 access.
Is that granted by the Port of Montreal, or is that granted through...
It's granted by the Port of Montreal, and it cascades down to the terminals.
So couldn't technically the Port of Montreal also grant access to local police jurisdictions all across the country?
We could if they ask access, but they couldn't open the container by themselves. CBSA needs to be there, or the RCMP, because they are the only two that can open a container under the Custom Act.
So you're saying CBSA and RCMP are the only two that can open the local container?
Under the Custom Act, yeah.
Okay. And then do you have local police jurisdictions across Canada reaching out to your
Not yet.
port?
They haven't applied for it yet. It's open for them. We've told them, but we've seen it a couple of weeks ago when the Toronto, the OPP did a joint operation with the police in Montreal. They seized a lot of cars and they arrested a few people. They came in with the police of jurisdiction, which is the police of Montreal. It's a question of jurisdiction, territorial jurisdiction. But if they demand access, they will grant them access. But then they can get in terminal, assess what it is, where they want to find something, then call in CBSA and open the container.
So in your experience so far, from what you've observed, is CBSA working in conjunction with these local police forces when they do reach out?
Under my comprehension, they do work with them.
Thank you. Chair, how much more time do I have? 30 seconds. Oh, okay. So I'll just ask the question to the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. Why do you think, and perhaps I'll ask this question to the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, and perhaps this question was already answered by the Montreal Port Authority, but why do you think that more vehicles are leaving Canada through the Montreal port than through your port? Is it just because of the geographical nature of the theft and where it's being taken to, the vehicles, or is there another element to it?
I do believe, that question was answered. To the best of my knowledge, I don't know of any other factors that we should be considering for why the rates are different.
Thank you.
You're here? Yes, Mr.
Chair, I want to answer Mr. Gahir's question. It was a great line. When you have municipal law enforcement,
Eating up everyone else's time.
sorry, I just want to clarify. He had a question about jurisdiction, and I don't think it was clearly answered.
But we're eating up everyone's time.
It may be something that you could talk about, Mr. Motz, when your turn comes up, if you don't mind. Ms. Michaud, please. But it was a good point.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to our witnesses for being here. I'm really pleased that you're here, and I'm eager to hear from the Port Authority of Montreal. We've heard a lot about this issue in the last few weeks and months, and the Port of Montreal has been identified as the principal hub for the export of stolen vehicles, along with California. But we know that the criminal activity actually is happening before and after the port operations, organized crime, it is said, might be influencing employees in the port. Perhaps you are, in a way, a victim of this, but Mr. Baudry, you talked about this a little bit, but could you talk about the process? Where do these activities happen under various jurisdictions? So if I have a company, whether it's legitimate or not, and I'm buying goods for export, there should be a documentation for that would be inspected by the Border Services Agency, and then the goods would be shipped by truck or otherwise to the port. I imagine that the documentation connected with the container needs to be produced and so on. Could you just take us through the steps, please? Thank you very much. I'll begin and let my colleague add what he would like, but the jurisdictional issue is important. We have 275 employees, and we have about 25,000 people who will come onto the premises. Everyone who either works for the Port Authority or one of the logistical partners, as my colleagues have talked about, there are security requirements. Now we have the operations of the port. A container comes through one of our access points, and there's a whole administrative process that is undertaken. We have to look to see if the manifest and the trucker, and we have to make sure that the trucker has the goods that are indicated on the manifest. There are few people involved because we want to make it more difficult for a criminal to identify a container and undertake criminal activities. So there is a barrier that makes it difficult for us to be involved. We have to depend on our partners for that. Now, you asked about the containers and how they get exported. All of those activities take place outside the Port Authority. It isn't the Montreal Port Authority that decides what can be exported and what can't. We need to keep the containers moving, and we depend on the security measures in place. I know that the Port Authority employees have limited access, and that there are government services are involved. Do you think that their role needs to be broadened? We know that there are only 8 customs agencies RCMP officers, and then there are only a few customs officers. We don't know how many. Well, all of those would be possible, and we are prepared to work on any solutions that are suggested as long as the responsibilities are delegated properly and there is the funding needed. So we are certainly open to that proposal. Would it be easier to concentrate on the container and what's in it, or on the documentation? Some people say there should be more scanning of containers and that all of the containers should be scanned, but we're told that would be impossible. Should the documentation be scrutinized more carefully to see if there are fraudulent piece of information like the vehicle number, the VIN? Maybe there have been a number of vehicles that have been exported with the same VIN. So what do you think? Well, that could really work, but this is outside of the scope of our Port Authority, because we don't have the means to really examine these documents that way, but CBSA does. We have the content, but not the contents. And so we and the terminals don't have access. It's only CBSA or the exporters, or so we don't see that information. So we can't look and see what's in the containers. Thank you.
6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank our witnesses today for helping guide us through this study. It seems to me like when looking at this issue, there's 2 potential advantages that we can take or make use of when dealing with this problem. Number 1, a car is not the easiest thing to hide because of its size. And 2, our ports seem to be natural choke points in that they rely on your ports to reach those lucrative export markets. I mean, this is obviously a multifaceted problem. We've heard from a range of witnesses, from auto manufacturers to police to intelligence gathering. They all have a role to play. But given the fact that a car is not the easiest item to hide, and that we have a natural choke point, I'm just wondering how we can take best advantage of that. At the Port of Montreal, when you have successfully located contraband cars, obviously stolen cars, and I know with the containers they are loaded off-site, they are sealed, and I assume it's a wire tag with a manifest. When you've worked your way back, like you've opened the container, you've found stolen cars, and you've like, that's how I like to approach problems. You find a problem, work your way backwards. What have been some of the common themes in that investigation? Like, where did things go wrong? Who ultimately signed off on what was in the container? That's how I want to know, like, how do we best improve that process?
It's part of the where the process goes haywire is there's no accountability on who stuffed the container. There's no, it's the paperwork, once say signed off and sent to CBSA, that's the end of it. But no, there's nobody that signed off saying what's in the container for real.
Okay.
It's all what's been submitted on paper. It's fraud, but how do you detect fraud? Then it's something that needs to be maybe reviewed in the regulations for accountabilities on the stuffing of the container.
And in discovering that fraud in the paperwork, is the person saying that it is in fact a vehicle that's being shipped, but it's a legitimate vehicle, or have you sometimes found that no, it's been the manifest says that there had been something completely different? Are there some certain patterns?
We've seen Frigidaire on sale cars.
Okay.
They say it's Frigidaires, but refrigerators, but it was cars in it.
Okay.
Like I said, there's no accountability. Who shut the doors and put the seal on?
Ms. Gill, did you have anything to add to that, like patterns that the Vancouver Port Authority has seen?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay. I want to delve down onto this, the use of technology, and I understand from Mr. Gahir's line of questioning that's within the purview of the CBSA. I know our ports are extremely busy places, and that our economy relies on your operations to be efficient. You know, we don't want containers to stay static. You require them to be moved at quite a rapid pace. So I'm just wondering, like how do you envision, if we're going to make these investments into this technology, how do you envision that it's best being used? I know containers arrive at ports by train and by truck. Do you envision a system where, like, as each truck is rolling in through your entrances, it's being scanned, or on trains? I'm just trying to help me understand the logistics of what this involves, and what your requirements are as a port to both satisfy the security requirements, but also to make sure that the goods are still moving through at an acceptable rate.
I would add to that the safety aspect of the operation of the equipment, because we're talking usually about the radiation emitting the equipment to scan, to X-ray the containers, and that would involve maybe the safety of the trucker or the operator or the workers around it. So we need to better assess what's the implication of putting in that technology, and do we have the space to put enough of them, not to slow down too much the entrance or the exit, if we want to go the exit too. But it needs to be studied before we can commit to that type of solutions. It exists somewhere else in the world, but in those places they don't have the same commitment as human life as we do in Canada.
And as a representative of the Port of Montreal, like have you seen demonstrations of this technology in use? Like, how in the places that it is being used, what lessons have you learned from how it's being deployed?
Well, I haven't traveled to those countries that use that technology. I know they exist, but we haven't. That's why we're not close to the use of that solutions, but it needs to be studied. So to the impacts, because just to give you an analogy with the equipment that CBSA already use to scan the import containers, it takes between 4 and 5 minutes each container to scan. So if we have 2,000 trucks a day entering the port, times 4 minutes, it doesn't work.
And Ms. Gill, I know in your opening statement you made some recommendations, but do you think, like, as a committee, like, you know, I'm assuming these are quite expensive machines. In your opinion, would that be a smart investment, or do you think we would fall into the trap of over-reliance on technology at the expense of human intelligence? You know, you've got so much experience. I just want to hear your perspective on this.
Thank you. I do think there is a place for AI to be able to assist the human capital that we use for searching containers. There's many implications of installing X-ray machines, resourcing, additional responsibilities on potentially CBSA and the terminal operators. So we'd definitely be willing to participate in that conversation on what that would look like and who all would be impacted. But I do feel that there is a place for AI to be able to scan the manifest, compare it to what's the contents of the container, to be able to identify more hot cans for CBSA to consider. That would be my...
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We're moving on to round two now, and we'll start with Mr. Motz, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here. A couple things are certainly troubling. One is the fact that the port authorities don't have, access to review the manifests. CBSA does to some degree. Obviously, there's a big gap between, as you said, Mr. Bergeron, the gap between a manifest is completed, but no one confirms that what's actually in the container is what's on the manifest. So there's an area we can fix. Any recommendations you have for that I don't have time to do it all today, but if you guys from Port Authorities could supply that information on your recommendations on how we can fix that gap, that would be great. The other concern that I had is, you know, I mean, I started law enforcement in 1980, before most of you in this room were born. And I can tell you that back then, early on, traditional organized crime in Montreal, outlaw motorcycle gangs in Vancouver, they ran the ports, and they still run the ports. And that is a fact. Now, but when I say that, it's not in the port proper necessarily. It's that gap between a car stolen in the GTA. People think they drive it into the port, they drive it onto a container on port property. We know that doesn't work. That's not how it happens. So we have a gap there as well. We know that you know, crime is getting worse in this country, and you know, after the 9 years of this government, what do we need to do to ensure that the containers that are being filled elsewhere and coming onto port property are you know, what's in them is in them, and we know what's in them. How do we do that differently, given organized crime is absolutely involved in that process?
Off the bat, it's kind of tough to answer the question precisely. But like I said earlier, is to devise either the regs or the acts to add some form of accountabilities.
Okay.
Be it the driver of the truck, be it the freight forwarder, be it whoever it's going to be, somebody is going to be signing on what is in the container. And if it's false, somebody is going to go to jail for that.
And thank you for that. I noticed, Ms. Gill, you had made a comment about the Marine Transportation Security Act. Is it possible if that act, if government takes the initiative to update that act, is it possible that we could change a process that, you know, before a container is sealed and enters port property, that it is inspected? Like, just, you know, you open up the back door, someone at the port entrance says, yeah, we have refrigerators, oh, we have cars. This is not what the manifest says. Like, would that be something that could stop the movement of contraband in and out of this country?
I wouldn't say it could be done in that fashion. The MTSRs are for port authorities to put in security measures to protect Canada's critical infrastructure. Almost exclusively, but that is the primary responsibility. The MTSRs do not have any mention of putting in measures for detecting or preventing criminality.
Okay.
So my suggestion would be that potentially, when we're talking about roles and accountabilities, is to add more of a role in there for persons either at the marine terminals or at the port authorities, where we could put in additional measures to assist law enforcement more than we're able to today.
Now, I know you probably in Vancouver have more, but you indicated in Montreal you have 275 employees for the port and about 25,000 peripheral people, companies that come in and do operations in there. What security measures do you have in place from a security clearance perspective? Do you guys do them? Do you get the law enforcement to do all your security clearances for everybody, or what?
The security clearance program is driven by Transport Canada.
Okay, but who does them? Like, where do you
Transport Canada.
Transport Canada does it. So where does Transport Canada get the information to do background checks on not only your 275 employees, but the 25,000 who have access to your port?
They don't do for the 25,000 people.
And that's the problem.
Yeah, that might be part of the problem. They do it for specific position or specific access to certain places,
okay,
but not for the general worker. Basically, it's resumed to people having authorities over other people, or people having authorities on the management of the inventory, like the checkers.
Mm-hmm.
The infamous checker we always talk about in the Port of Montreal, that were for a long time affiliated with the West End gang. But that's old history. But basically, the longshoremen of the 1,200 longshoremen working in the port, maybe 200 of them have got security clearance because their jobs are not captured under the Transport Canada the security clearance program.
Okay.
So for Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, we have over 32,000 port passes, and only 7,000 of those are required to have security clearances. So as per the Transport Canada regulations, it's a requirement for everybody entering a cruise facility to all have security clearances. However, at container terminals, the way that the regulations are written are certain roles, and in certain areas of the container terminal, that is how the container terminal determines who needs a clearance. So it is through the guidance and the categories of people described by Transport Canada in the regulations. So we are kind of following the regulations on who can even apply.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. O'Connell, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you all for being here. Mr. Bergeron, I want to start with you. In an earlier question you answered to Mr. Caputo, you said that not many trucks are inspected at the Port of Montreal by CVSA. On April 3rd, it was announced that there were over 600 stolen vehicles in an operation that were recovered in an operation with CBSA at the Port of Montreal. A quick Google search shows that a 20-foot shipping container usually fits 1, maybe 2 cars. A 40-foot container could maybe hold 4. So if I take the largest containers, that would mean about 150 containers at least were opened in that one operation. So I'm just wondering are you involved in any of that? Are you aware of any of that? Or was your statement earlier maybe that you wouldn't be aware of all the operational things that are happening?
Just to clarify, when I answered the question earlier, it was on a random basis, or a targeted basis at the entrance of the port. I'm not aware of any verification by customs or CBSA. They do, however, inspect containers when they've been declared, spotted, or whatever the system they use to guide them to inspect a container. They do open containers on a regular basis in the port. But be it for cars or drugs, we don't know. Right. They put aside a certain number of containers each day and every day, and they do the inspection on them.
Right. So that's important clarification, because I think to leave out there to Canadians to say not many are being inspected is...
They are inspected once they're targeted.
Thank you. And you also spoke about increased tagging and technology, and I just am curious what that actually looks like. You said there would be free leases for partners who could come. What does that look like? I know you're limited in your time in your opening statement. I'm just curious about what that is.
It's basically a system that's it's called TAG, but it's not related to the AirTag system of iPhone. It's a company, a technology company, that put devices in the cars and can monitor their movement across the country everywhere. And we have them install their own antenna in the port to assess if there are reported stolen cars in the port, so they can direct the police to come and investigate. And we in the process of adding more antennas so they can pinpoint earlier and more precisely where the cars are. And we've opened up the proposition to any other company that offers such a systems.
Thank you. And you, in response to Mr. McGregor's question, you talked about some of the concerns around the technology for just scanning every single container. We've heard about concerns in terms of timing and whatnot, and how to find, and that's why we announced funding for additional study and research for other technology. But we hadn't heard before the kind of concerns from an employee standpoint from the radiation of the scanning technology. And you said that countries who do currently use this don't have human rights standards. What are some of those countries that use it? Because there are certain even mayors and politicians saying this is the only thing needed, and I think this is an important component.
Well, we've seen that technology being used, especially in the Middle East and those parts of the world. Other countries do use that technology. We do use it in Montreal, but the CBSA use it. But the human aspect has to be removed from the area where the scanning is being done. That increases the time where everything is stopped. That's why we need to better understand the technology and what's the impact on the fluidity and the movement.
So you're not saying there isn't a place for scanning, but this idea of just setting up more scanners and scanning everything through is probably not necessarily feasible, and therefore these other technologies would be important to then do the same work, but without the human kind of negative impacts and slowing down.
If they do exist, and we're open for it. It's just like Anita says, The better aspect would be the AI.
Okay.
That would be one of the things that could increase the success rates of detections.
Thank you. Do I have time for another question? Okay, quickly, Ms. Gill, you mentioned about the regulations under review and some changes that you could see fit. I won't have time to ask what those are, but could you submit to this committee what some of those updated regulations could mean in terms of improving the ability for ports to work with us on this?
Yes, I will take that away.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't have time for a full question there.
Thank you. Ms. Michaud, please.
Just earlier, you mentioned that you were open to having your officers might have greater latitude in being able to open containers or to doing inspections by other companies. I don't know if that would be a good idea. It might be, but it's interesting to raise it. You said that there are jurisdictional issues. You said that in some cases it's CBSA that has to do a certain activity. So would you say that you would like to have more responsibility? I know that you are already working with various partners, but if the Port Authority had more responsibility, do you think that would be helpful? Or do you think that the others need to keep their responsibilities? We don't want to get involved in the jurisdictions and powers of other jurisdictions. We want to help them as well as we can. We could certainly improve access and the disclosure of information. Right now, the policies don't allow us to have access to certain information because that comes under the police authorities. The investigation process and to get the information they need, that doesn't involve us. We don't have the authorities, so we can't get the information that they need, for example, on the manifest. That's only CBSA that has access to that information. So that's something we could talk about. Mr. Chairman, I have a suggestion for the committee. I don't know if I can just make the suggestion or I have to put forward a motion. I think that we hear some similar ideas coming up. The idea of having security checks for employees that have access. We only have 2 more meetings. We have May 2nd. Perhaps we should have the Minister of Transport come along and others to answer our questions. I don't know if this is a suggestion that would be acceptable to other members of the committee, but I wanted to ask.
That's fine. Sure. We can include that in the request. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Michaud, and your time's up. Mr. McGregor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to my line of questioning about, when those 600 cars were discovered and just when you worked your way back, how did the majority of those cars arrive to the Port of Montreal? Like, how was the container transported mostly? Did they come by truck or some by train?
I don't have access to that information. I don't know how the container got in the terminal.
Sorry, but doesn't the Port of Montreal know how each container arrived?
I could go back. I could find it out for you if you wanted me. But it's a process of investigation that belongs to CBSA and the police jurisdiction that it did an investigation. I could go back and tell you that that container came in with such a truck, with such a driver, on that train of that batch. I can go back and find that information.
Now I know containers are loaded in all manner of ways and all manner of locations. I mean, in a previous life, I've worked on a walnut farm. I've seen these big sea containers loaded with raw walnuts, and they are closed and then they're shipped off. And yes, they are tagged. There's a manifest to say, yes, this container is full of walnuts. But I'm just wondering, like that container, once it's been sealed, is then in the hands of a number of different actors to get it from where it was loaded to the port and then onto a ship. Do you think there's value in like what kind of liability does a transport company like say CN Rail or a trucking company, what liability do those companies or their drivers have or the railway operators have to like sometimes ensure what they're carrying is what's actually on the manifest?
As far as I know, they don't have liability because the container is sealed.
But do you see, would it be preferable from your point of view to maybe have a little bit more responsibility for those different actors?
Off the bat, I couldn't answer that question, but I would go back to my earlier statement saying we need to make accountable the person that put down the seal that's on the container. If the seal is not broken all the way up to the port, there's nothing happened to what's inside of it. The importance is when the seal is put on, who signed for it? Who's responsible to vouch what's inside the container? Is it walnuts or cars? Yeah. That's the weakest point in the link right now.
Okay.
There's no responsibility for that.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're going to move to Mr. Couric, and we're reducing it to 2.5 minutes. Mr. Couric.
Thanks very much, and appreciate our witnesses being here and talking about the conduit side of things. So I want to just continue on that line of questioning. You have you're saying there's no accountability for the person for who's putting the seal on that container that says what is or is not in it. How do we fix that?
Well, I'm not a better person to answer that question. It has to be referred, unfortunately, to CBSA or the other agencies that govern those acts. Because it's not something that's the manifest and all the information for export is governed by CBSA.
Okay. And anything to add, Ms. Gill? So I'm curious if you could share maybe your observations. You know, we've seen a proliferation of auto theft over the last number of years. Have you, in your observations with your law enforcement partners, has law enforcement been able to keep up with this proliferation of auto theft?
Si je peux me permettre, ça ne nous appartient pas de juger.
If I may say, we can't judge the performance of police forces, but we have to say that over the past few years, we have seen increased activity and seizures. Every time a vehicle is seized, either in the port or before it gets there, that's good news for us, and we support them. But nothing is we don't have the information to evaluate how well they're doing or what they're doing.
When it comes to being able to solve some of these problems, you know, I think a lot of Canadians would be surprised when you cross an international border. Every vehicle is checked. When you go through an airport, everybody goes through a security scanner. So it's a different context in a port. But how do we make sure that we can increase the measures to actually be catching? You're talking about what's on a manifest versus what's in a container. How do we make sure that you are given the tools, that there's the approvals for the new technology? What steps are taken and being that I'm probably close to out of time, I would invite our two port authorities, if you could provide suggestions to the committee to make sure that this committee understands from your perspective as self-admittedly, you're the conduit, what barriers can be removed to ensure that we can actually stop these vehicles from leaving Canada, going to other jurisdictions where they're being sold, and actually stop this crime from taking place.
Thank you, Mr. Couric. Mr. McKinnon, online, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to carry on with this matter of seals, as Mr. McGregor and others have focused on. Are these seals individually identifiable? I'll ask Ms. Gill, please.
I will let Felix Pierre answer that question. I'm not as familiar with the seal process as he is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fair enough.
It'll be a pleasure to answer the question. Yes, they are identifiable. They have either a numerical number or alphanumerical numbers, but they are different type of seals. They are wire seals, chain seals, high security seals, plastic seals, paper seals, and they all have unique numbers. That might be a fault in the system that needs to be probably reassessed on a standardized seal or something, because it's the only thing that we have on the manifesto, the legal paper, is the number. It doesn't say what type of seal it is.
So are the people who, who are the people who are able to put seals on a container? And apparently once the seal's on there, it has a certain legal significance. Do they have to be bonded entities?
That's something that CBSE must answer for us. I'm not familiar with that aspect, but that's the person that, or that's the, like I said earlier, the accountability part is not very strong in the acts or the regulation right now. So that's something that needs to be better answered by the CBSE.
I guess what I'm drawing into is perhaps as a way of examining the seals themselves to determine their origin, to see whether these origins are problematic in terms of, stolen vehicles that have already been detected. And can the ports, I don't know if the ports can do that, maybe it's law enforcement has to drill into this, but I guess, can you make any suggestions to make the person who puts on the seal more responsible?
Like I said earlier, it's the act and regulation has to be revised. Right now, there's no accountability for that. The acts or the regulation requires a seal to be put on and signify on the paperwork, but that's the end of it.
Okay. Well, I think that's my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and that's the end of these witnesses. So we appreciate your testimony here today, and thank you for coming. We'll take a couple minutes break here and get ready for our next witnesses. Thank you. I'd like to welcome our second panel of witnesses. In person, Service de Police de la Ville de Montréal, Yannick Desmarais, Commander, Section Head. Sûreté Quebec, Michel Patineau, Chief Inspector. And online by video conference, Intact Insurance, Gimme Lamy. I hope I didn't do too bad on your name. Senior Vice President, Personal Lines, Canadian Operations. So we're going to give you each up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, after which we will proceed to rounds of questions. Chief Inspector Patineau, would you like to go first?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would first like to thank the members of the committee for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today. I am Michel Patineau, Chief Inspector at the Quebec Police Force since last December. Most of my career has been spent in the fight against organized crime since 2005. Vehicle theft is an increasing concern in Quebec, and as we have seen in Ontario too, we have seen a great increase over the past few years in this area. This is a crime against property, a property crime, but public security is involved, especially because there is violence, including carjacking and high-risk high-speed chases, as the members of the committee have become aware in Quebec. With the strategic location of the Port of Montreal, we have the main transit port for the export of stolen vehicles from Quebec and Ontario. To deal with this problem, the Quebec Police Force set up in March 2022 provincial coordination in this area. It started with the Recherché project, and we are undertaking investigations. We are working to develop partnerships with other key actors, including CBSA and the Port of Montreal, offering assistance to other partner organizations like the OBP and municipal police forces in Quebec and Ontario, setting up a dedicated team to collect intelligence about exporters of stolen vehicles. The team is made up right now of police officers from the Sûreté du Québec, the RCMP, the Montreal Police Force, and the Longueuil Police Force. We are also working more intensely on the issue of vehicle theft by mobilizing, since February 5th of this year, 30 officers from the Regional Joint Squad on the North Shore. We are working with 11 police forces. We have been able to have, through these efforts, 43 interventions, seized 402 vehicles, inspected 202 containers, and made 11 arrests. The Sûreté du Québec also took part with the OPP, the CBSA, the Montreal Police Force, and Équité, joint seizures, searches in the Port of Montreal under the OPP Vector project, where we recovered some 600 vehicles. We also have a virtual team for interprovincial and international intelligence on the export of vehicles. We've set that up, and this involves resources from the Sûreté du Québec, the OPP, the RCMP, and the CBSA. There are 2 police officers from our force that have been assigned to Ottawa to work with the OPP as well. Of course, cooperation with our partners is key to the success of our activities. As we've seen over the past few years, solid cooperation requires free-flowing exchange of intelligence that is up to date, the setting up of joint teams, the carrying out of ad hoc joint operations, and mutual assistance between the partners. Finally, after taking part in the summit organized by the federal government on February 8th, the Sûreté du Québec decided to organize a Quebec meeting of its own, which will take place on May the 30th. I want to just mention that we have the Association of Chiefs of Police of Quebec, the Montreal Police Force, the OPP, and the RCMP that are involved in organizing this event. The idea will be to bring together public and private partners to come up with new approaches, to look at the current situation, to consolidate partnerships, and develop new partnerships. So thank you, and I will be pleased to answer any questions.
Mr. Desmarais, please.
Thank you. Mr. Desmarais. Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for inviting the Montreal Police Force to speak today as commander of the investigation section under the SUD project. I am responsible for organizing activities in this area dealing with vehicle theft. As you know, this is an important issue and a growing one, and Montreal is strongly impacted by its location. It is an issue that has a major impact on victims as well as on the financial and the feelings of security that people have. We know that there is also a link with armed violence. We know that people that are involved regularly, when they're caught, they have firearms. Our investigations and intelligence are showing that a lot of the money for these firearms comes from vehicle theft operations. And we are working on new strategies in 2024, or between 2022 and 2024, we took part in the Recherché project. We were able to arrest 39 suspects and 565 vehicles were recovered. We are trying to put strong pressure on criminal gangs in this area. This has led us to increase our activities because the issues are growing. There's a shortage of new vehicles and bottlenecks in the supply chain. We have always worked well with partners, and in the past 2 years, we have set up a new approach to do so. We need to destabilize these criminal gangs, and we are doing so vigorously and in every area. The National Summit on Combating Auto Theft last month, or in February, told us that this was the right strategy, because just a month after the summit, we carried out the volcano operation with the OPP and arrested 34 suspects, and they will be facing justice in Ontario, though they were arrested in Montreal. This is sending another message to the criminal underworld. That is, regardless of where you are, you will be arrested. And they thought that they could get away with these activities by changing jurisdictions, but we are showing that they are wrong in that. So this is bringing our cooperation with the OPP to another level. For weeks, we worked together on the same premises, and we had never done so before. We are increasing our cooperation with the Montreal Police, the OPP, the CBSA, and other aspects of the security operations. This has helped us because between December 2023 and April 2024, we were able to recover nearly 600 vehicles at the Port of Montreal. All of these operations are affecting all levels of the pyramid of organized crime and showing that they cannot assume impunity. We are taking action against these thieves through our own investigations as well. In February, we dismantled a specialized organization and arrested 9 suspects and recovered 55 vehicles. So a day doesn't go by, but our controllers are arresting suspects. Prevention is key, and we have worked on increasing communications and raising awareness. We know, though, that the criminal groups are very adaptable, and we need to be vigilant and take a proactive approach to be able to prevent them from not feeling the pressure. We need to work together at the national level on this. Thank you.
Mr. Lamy, please, online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bonjour, je m'appelle Guillaume Lamy. Et je suis...
Thank you. My name is Guillaume Lamy. I'm the Senior Vice President of Personal Lines for Intact Insurance.
1 in 4 Canadians from coast to coast count on us to protect their homes, cars, and businesses. We play a critical role in managing difficult situations, including accidents and natural disasters. I want to thank the committee for the invitation to appear today on this important issue. Intact was pleased to have participated in the National Summit on Combating Auto Theft. I'm encouraged that the discussions remain ongoing as we await the release of the National Action Plan. I do want to acknowledge the additional measures announced in this week's budget 2024 that will provide law enforcement with additional tools to combat theft. Intact was pleased to see this continued momentum, and we look forward to future strategic measures. As we heard at the summit, this is not an issue that the insurance industry, law enforcement, manufacturer, or government can tackle alone. This is a national crisis that requires a whole-of-society approach to solve. We look forward to bridging the gap from discussion to concrete action to protect Canadians and promote the well-being of our communities. At Intact, we have been at the forefront of the auto theft crisis, taking the initial calls and witnessing firsthand the impact of theft on our customer. For more than a year, we have been acting forcefully on multiple fronts to address this growing issue. This includes working closely with provincial regulators to raise awareness around theft trends, partnering with companies such as TAG to offer Intact customers the opportunity to install aftermarket tracking device on their vehicles, sometimes entirely paid by us or at a preferred rate, and ramping up communication efforts through our broker channel to encourage customers to protect their vehicles. Nos efforts jusqu'à présent ont certainement aidé à prévenir les vols.
Our efforts today have certainly helped prevent thefts, but they don't deal with the problem at the source. The sad reality is that Canada has become a target of choice for auto theft, as the committee has heard, and as was predicted, vehicle theft has continued to increase since the beginning of 2024. And even if the problem is national, we feel it more in Ontario and Quebec.
Including organized crime, see vehicle theft in Canada as a low-risk, high-reward crime. The ability to steal vehicles is increasingly easy, and the penalties for doing so not strong enough. Whether vehicles are exported or revamped, the profit margins are very high. We need to create the change that moves Canada from a target destination where organized crime groups easily source vehicles to a country where cars are too difficult to steal and export to bother trying. What we've seen in the past couple of years is that theft is what I call a whack-a-mole problem. Targeting specific cars for protection only divert the thieves to another make or model, and addressing the issue in one jurisdiction drive bad actors to other opportunities. Intact recognized that cost of living remains top of mind for many Canadians. The unfortunate reality is that vehicle theft is a key source of increasing premiums for all customers. We all have a role to play in combating this trend. This is not an issue that's going to subside without continued action. From our perspective, continued investment in this CBSA are critical to enhance investigative and enforcement work. We've seen the positive impact of a coordinated approach between CBSA and law enforcement that have led to recoveries and seizures at our rail yards and ports over the past few months and even recent weeks. This is very encouraging, but we know that there is more work to be done. In looking at the U.S., we can see where a harmonization of export rules would provide an enhanced level of protection. For example, in the US, a vehicle must be presented 72 hours prior to departure as an export requirement. Introducing the same rule in Canada would allow for more vehicles to be searched prior to export and ensuring the actual VIN matches what is declared on the export declaration form. Nous savons que les réseaux de vol d'automobiles.
We know that the networks of automobile theft are thriving right now. They are very good at using new technologies. The criminal world always evolves, and this means it is much more important for us to keep ahead. The motor vehicle safety regulations haven't been updated since 2007, and this is a problem that we need to deal with urgently to guarantee new technologies.
Sharing is critical in combating the trends we continue to see. We welcome the recent investment directed to Interpol's Joint Transnational Vehicle Crime Project. Continued targeted investments such as this will lead to the recovery of more stolen vehicles. Data-driven partnership and information disclosure between the public and private sectors has been successful in U.S. jurisdiction. Canada would no doubt see similar success by enhancing the sharing of data. In closing, I want to thank the committee once again for the invitation and for keeping this critical discussion ongoing. Enfin, soyez assurés qu'Intact.
Finally, be assured that Intact will always be prepared to offer its expertise and resources to ensure security and resilience and protect the Canadian public against this public security issue.
So we're going to start questioning 6 minutes with Mr. Shipley first, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here this morning. I'd like to start off with the two officers, if I could, get their opinion on this. We've heard that auto theft has shifted from being a simple issue of property theft to a complex issue of sophisticated, violent, organized crime. Can you describe how these dynamics have changed in recent years and what you're seeing on the ground in Quebec? To both you, sirs.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it has shifted in Quebec recently. We haven't seen the same violence as they do see in Ontario right now, carjacking. But what we do see is that the people who are executing the thefts on the ground are willing to put lives in danger to not get caught. So we're seeing that. And one thing to keep in mind is that these structures are very these organized crime structures that are going from the theft to the exportation and out overseas is a very complex organization, and they all have different roles and responsibilities in the organization. So what we're seeing is the violence is more on the ground, and it's more to evade getting caught.
Anything to answer?
Well, in the Montreal Police Force, we are seeing the same thing. Armed violence is something we see every day. We see firearms, and there was a violent attack just a few weeks, very recently, and we have an investigation underway. There were officers that were fired on. This is a very important issue. And certainly we make the connection with organized crime.
Thank you for that. Hopefully those officers were okay and they weren't hurt in any of that altercation you just mentioned. I'd like to ask my next question to the gentleman from Intact, Mr. Lemay. Is that the way you say it, sir? Lemay. Sorry about that. Mr. Lemay, I recently had a call from a resident of my riding who has a son who's 19 years old, who's been driving for 3 years. They indicated that their son had no tickets, no issues, but their renewal for their insurance came up this year, and it was going to be an additional $70 a month going forward. So when this resident phoned their insurance provider, and I'm not sure who their provider was, they indicated that the increase was strictly, and this was the answer they received, strictly due to auto theft. Are you seeing that type of increases, and is that the way this is affecting people who are already struggling with affordability issues across Canada?
Great question. There's definitely affordability issue, and theft is one cause. I think we see inflation having an effect on insurance price across the whole chain, be it the vehicles are more expensive to repair, but obviously theft is one of the major driver. And we've seen the cost of theft really triple for insurance companies between 2018 and today. Just to put some numbers into perspective, it was roughly at the industry level, I'm not talking Intact here, 400 million in 2018, and we've gone at 1.2 billion in the last data, the last year that we got on data. So clearly it is a key driver, and that's why I think we need to address that at the root cause. Because at the end of the day, insurance companies are paying for claims, but as you mentioned, this is eventually the customers that pay for it through their insurance premium.
Thank you for that answer. And just to clarify, you mentioned from 2018 to today. Did you say insurance rates across Canada have tripled? Was that your quote, sir?
No, sorry. My quote was the cost of theft was 400 million and now is 1.2 billion. So the cost of theft alone tripled.
Of theft is tripled.
The insurance premium have not tripled.
I'm glad we got that clarified. Thank you. You mentioned that your company is promoting tags. You did say that you offset some of those costs to customers. Could you just expand to me, tag, from what my knowledge is, just shows the location of it. It's not going to do anything to prevent criminals from stealing a car. They don't know if it has a tag in there. So how is that benefiting your company or the owner of the vehicle?
Well, the thing is, yes, they know that there's a tag in there. So when tag,
how does the criminal know there's a tag in there? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. So tag, basically aftermarket tracking device. But when it's installed on the vehicle, there's a little etching that's done on the window of the car, and there's what we call the sticker effect, where the thief just see the model that they like, he sees protected by tag, they go to the next door neighbor that doesn't have tag and take that car indeed. And what we're seeing is that only 1% of the cars that we've seen stolen had tag installed, and on those we're able to recover them 99% of the time. So it's very effective. Obviously it doesn't prevent theft, but there's kind of a disincentive.
Thank you. So it'd be like a home alarm system. A lot of people would just put the stickers in their windows whether they have an alarm or not. So I see what you mean by that. Back to the two officers. Thank you. I'm getting short on time here. Mr. and I'm terrible with this, I'm sorry, Mr. Desmarais, I think I was close on that. Recently, Yves Francoeur, the president of the Montreal Police Officers Union, recently told La Presse that sentences for auto theft are minimal and that everyday police officers in Montreal are catching individuals who are punished with sentences of just a few months. Do you agree with Mr. Francoeur and that we need stricter sentences for these crimes?
Well, we certainly want stronger sentences. We always are in favor of that. But we carry out an operation in February, and we arrested nine people, and 55 vehicles were recovered, and they are still in prison.
The translation was still going.
So they are still in custody.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I just didn't catch the end. It was
Mr. Shipley, Mr. Shefke, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And before I begin asking questions to our witnesses, who I'm very grateful to have joined us today, I just wanted to put into the record 3 paragraphs. In 2005, Mr. Chair, Department of Justice report found evidence that minimum sentencings are not an effective sentencing tool and don't offer any increased crime prevention benefits. In 2007, the Parliamentary Information and Research Service found that existing research generally does not support the use of mandatory minimum sentences for the purposes of deterrence. And most recently, in 2017, a Statistics Canada report concluded that research in Canada and the United States has found no evidence that mandatory minimum penalties have deterred crime. Rather, some studies suggest that mandatory minimum penalties can result in overly harsh penalties and disparities that actually increase recidivism. And I'm going to be forwarding those 3 reports to our analysts in the hopes that we can reference those during the report that we will be compiling. Donc maintenant, je vais commencer avec les questions. Merci à vous deux pour...
I want to start with my questions now. Thank you for both of you for being here in person and Mr. Lamy online. And I congratulate you, Mr. Patnaud, on the meeting that you're going to be holding, and I hope I will be inviting. We need to attack this auto theft problem by investing in resources, the frontline officers, the RCMP, the CBSA, and unfortunately there were cuts during Prime Minister Harper's time. These services are vital to Canadians and, in your case, to Montrealers.
An underlying challenge here that brings it all together, because there's been this frame that this is a Canadian problem. But we know, looking around the world, that thefts have doubled in the United States. They've gone up significantly in Italy, in Europe as a whole. New Zealand actually has the record for the most thefts per capita. It's skyrocketed around the world. So I'm trying to find out what is the problem that we need to be attacking, aside from finding solutions like investing in the CBSA, like investing in our police forces to catch the criminals and get those cars back. And something that I brought up in previous committees when we had testimony from auto manufacturers was, are cars just easier to steal right now? We had testimony from some police officers who said that they're catching 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds. We had my honorable colleague from the Conservatives mention that there was a 15-year-old that was caught stealing a vehicle by purchasing something on Amazon for $100. So the question I have for both of you as well as Mr. Lamy online, is it just easier right now? Is that part of the problem to steal vehicles? And I'll start with you, Mr. Patnaud.
I think that's one of the problems. This problem, I don't think there's a silver bullet. I don't think there's one solution. There's many facets to this problem, and that's why the partnerships are so important. Definitely, it's easier to steal. The technology is definitely a problem. Our president of the ADPQ is in his 4 recommendations. One of the recommendations is to legislate for the automakers. And us at the Sûreté du Québec, we have many private and public committees that we sit on. We discuss different problems.
Thank you.
What we're sharing, what we see, what we observe, and share with them to work towards solutions.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Desmarais.
Oui. Écoutez, pour répondre à une partie.
Well, I would answer last part of your question. We have 550 cases, and as Mr. Patnaud said, this is a huge problem, and there are many facets. So the automakers have a responsibility, as do other players.
Do you think that cars are just easier to steal now? It's costing your industry billions of dollars, which is being transferred along to Canadians?
Definitely, and I'll echo what Mr. Patnaud was saying, that it is a multifaceted issue and it needs a whole of society approach, but clearly manufacturers have their part to do. We've seen like the motor vehicle safety regulation has last been updated in 2007 with theft protection standards within it from 1998. Obviously, the cars are not made the same way today than in 1998.
Thank you, Mr. Lamy.
To us, that's an important part, yeah.
I appreciate that very much. I had my honorable colleague, Mr. McGregor, who in a previous meeting had spoken to technology and the fact that we have on our phones verification. You know, I have to do 3 things for my phone to be able to recognize me, particularly my parliamentary phone. Would it be helpful to you and your members who have to deal with these car thefts for cars themselves to have multi-factor identification? Instead of just having a key, which you can offset by buying something on Amazon for $100, perhaps having the keypad, the screen used as a keypad, or other technology. Would that be helpful and free up resources that you could better put somewhere else in tackling crime? Thoughts?
Absolutely, that would definitely be helpful. It's another tool that we'll have in our tool set, but as we've seen in the past, organized crime has adapted to what we put forward, so we have to keep
being vigilant.
Keep being vigilant, keep the pressure on.
Monsieur Desmarais.
Évidemment, nous, de notre côté.
Well, technology, as Mr. Patnaud has said, it will always be useful, but right now the difficulty is with the issue that it's easier to steal vehicles right now.
I mean, I'm not an expert in car security, but what we see in our data is a big gap between some manufacturers. So clearly some know how to protect, some don't. and raising the bar for everyone is,
Thank you.
is part of the solution.
Mr. Chair, I know I'm out of time, but given the testimony we've just heard here, perhaps it would be good for us to invite the presidents of the car manufacturers, GM, Toyota, Volkswagen, and Chrysler, to join us here in committee to perhaps respond to some questions about what they're doing to make cars harder to steal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Michaud, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. We have heard quite a few witnesses already in our study, and people tend to put blame on others, and we heard from the Port of Montreal earlier. We know that there were things that were done earlier and things that have changed. The automakers tend to say it isn't our problem, the problem is with the thieves. We know that the Recherché project was the result of a great partnership, which is very encouraging. And Mr. Desmarais, you mentioned that organized crime is involved. You see this, and you are already working against organized crime in other areas as well. You know that the thefts of vehicles give them money for other activities, and vice versa. So perhaps you, if you have more, you have your both your hands involved and kind of arrest people. So as my colleague was saying, when a vehicle is recovered, we can look back at the how this evolved, and there are various partners involved. So if you recover a vehicle in a container, and I know you can't reveal secrets, but how do you go back to the source and do that investigation? What is the process if somebody puts something into a container and that container is sealed and then it's discovered that it's a theft? How do you do this investigation? How do you react? Could you give us some details without revealing what you shouldn't? Well, yes, as I was saying earlier, the whole structure of auto theft is complex. We've got the thieves, we have people on the ground, we have the customers, we have the people that bring it to the port, we have the buyers. So we've got lower and higher levels, and then we have the international players as well. When we get a vehicle or information, we need the intelligence to go further. This is why it's so important to coordinate our investigations and coordinate our efforts about where we're going to conduct our operations. We need to have the intelligence and then apply that information in real time. We need the information about the carrier, about the source, to put everything together to see the patterns for our investigations. Well, I think most of what needs to be said has said. Yes, we need the information, the intelligence. There isn't really a problem between our police forces, but there is information that we need to be able to come up with the right intelligence, and sometimes we need to act very quickly. So the free flow of information is very important. Thank you. So before being able to open a container, there's a need for a search warrant, I imagine. And is that a bottleneck? It takes time for that. But is there some way to do things better? Do you see constraints that slow you down because something has to be sought, even if you have some doubts about what is in the container? Then perhaps you can't take your investigation to the point you want. Well, basically, there's the work between the police forces and with them. That all works very well with respect to the containers. But when we look at the broader context, if the police officers working in the port had broader powers, that would be helpful for the Montreal police force and others for the opening of containers. That would facilitate our work. The head of the Police Chiefs Association in Quebec said that the process for security accreditation for port employees and maybe for the police forces, maybe they could be involved, or the RCMP even. What do you think of that? Do you think that you already have your hands full? Well, we have heard about this problem, and that's one of the possible avenues of action. There is a division of the Quebec Police Force that works on security accreditation. But I think we have to concentrate on reducing auto thefts, and I don't think that's where, in the short term, we're going to make the best gains. We need to work quickly to get the intelligence we need, work in cooperation with our police forces, and to identify the criminal organizations involved.
Please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for offering your expertise. I am interested in deterrence, in wanting to make thieves afraid of being caught. Now, in my home province of British Columbia in the early 2000s, we had remarkable success with the bait car program. It drove down auto theft significantly, and in fact, some of the most wanted car thieves were apprehended in such a way. And I can, in fact, remember the province of BC, in partnership with the various police forces, actually, directly warning criminal organizations. They spent money on television advertisements. There were posters. There were even videos from inside the car showing the moment when the car thief realized they had been caught. I remember they would show images of different cars at different locations saying, one of these cars is a police bait car, but you don't know which one. I would just like to hear from your respective jurisdictions' experience with the use of bait cars. Is this a program, like what level of success have you seen? Do you see value in putting more resources into it? Can you expand on that, please?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bait cars are a good investigation technique, but we want to really focus. We want to take a more open approach, so I put more emphasis on the thieves and on the exporters, but that's a good point.
Concentrating right now is looking at the networks that are exporting, that are hiring, recruiting young adults to do these crimes. So that we're really looking at dismantling that, and that I don't think bait cars they solve part of the problem, but not the bigger problem that we're looking at.
Thank you. And I know that these criminal organizations, by process of evolution, in order for them to survive, they have to be very smart in their operations. They're very compartmentalized. When a criminal organization, directs one of its low-level members to steal a car, like when a car has been stolen, in your opinion, your experience, when is a criminal organization at its most vulnerable? Like where is your best point at interceding? Is it in the initial moments after the car is stolen? Is it the natural choke points at the ports? We're just trying to understand this as a committee where we can best direct federal resources.
Well, I think that for us, the strategy is really to target the more of the networks and the exporters, the ones that are in contact with the clients overseas, the ones that have contacts of people on the ground. They're the one pulling the strings. They're the ones that are hiring and recruiting. The recruits c'est de la main d'œuvre, and there's a lot. So I think if we really want to have an impact and really want to dismantle and lower this crisis, we really have to go to the people pulling the strings and concentrate on the networks that are exporting and transporting and have the contacts with the people overseas.
And when we've heard from previous witnesses about how the average age of people involved in stealing cars is getting lower. We heard age ranges from 15 to 22, and like Mr. Schiefke, I'm amazed that someone that young can overcome a car today with all of the advertised technology that it has in it. But when you apprehend these young individuals, what kind of patterns are you seeing with regards to their background? And given the nature of the criminal organization that they work for, is it relatively easy to get them to turn into an informant, or is there a threat of violence that's preventing them from assisting you?
Well, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the
I
last part of your question, but what I could say is that we do see there's certain recruitment of street gangs that do have a history of violence, of narcotics. So that is a certain clientele that are being hired by these criminal organizations to do that. But it's not 100% of the people as well. I mean, it varies.
Well, certainly we see these young people of 15 to 25 years of age, and we've seen young people from Montreal to Toronto to steal cars, and they get even tortured in Toronto if they aren't successful. So we feel it's very important to work as a team.
Just add something to that, and I think this is a good opportunity to do some prevention as well with these young offenders, like we did with the gun violence in Quebec. Is that they're being recruited, they're vulnerable. So just I think that the education piece is very important, and the prevention piece is very important too with these young offenders.
So as police officers, you would both endorse further resources in reaching out to these young people before they get caught up in this criminal.
Absolutely.
You've seen remarkable success in those kinds of programs.
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. And just as a final conversation, we have heard from police frustration that repeat offenders are sometimes they find them back out on the street again committing the same crime. We know that in the criminal code, the tools do exist to increase sentences based on aggravating factors and a person's history. In your relationship with Crown prosecutors, why is it that those existing tools of the criminal code are not being used somehow, in some cases, to police officers' satisfaction?
Well, we have excellent relations with the various prosecutors, regardless of whether we're talking about young people or adults, but young people who are arrested on the street don't necessarily have a criminal record, so they are released. I do think that we need to deal with that, but we need to work on prevention. There's a great deal of money to be made through these activities.
Based on the time here, we're going to move to 2.5 minutes. And Mr. Lloyd, you're up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions will be directed to the officers present. There have been some commentators who have argued that, these auto thefts are essentially a victimless crime, that we're dealing with purely property theft. And some commentators have argued that not only are minimum sentences and stiffer sentences ineffective, but that they would be unjust, an opinion that I obviously do not agree with. But we do know that this is not a victimless crime. Organized crime isn't putting the profits, the massive profits they're making off these stolen vehicles, to beneficial uses for society. And I'm hoping you can illustrate to us what your intelligence is telling you about what these profits from these auto thefts are doing in our country. Like, are they contributing to firearms violence? Are they contributing to our drug epidemic? Can you give us some more detail and context about what these stolen vehicles are paying for in our country?
Well, we are certainly seeing through our intelligence, we are seeing that firearms are a big issue. We're seeing homicides. We do search and seizures where we find firearms and other goods So obviously, these activities give them greater access to arms, and there is more violence.
Is that what we're seeing is that organized crime is very good to adjusting to the opportunities that are out there to make a lot of money quickly. We've seen it with fraudulent activity that where organized crime has shifted into that, and now they've shifted into car thefts as well. So I mean, I think what we're seeing is that organized crimes are adjusting to the market that's available to them, and on our end, we haven't seen too much financing. Our intel right now don't have too much financing into other criminal activities, but we see the same organized crime taking advantage of different markets of criminality.
So in my last 30 seconds, you are seeing a direct link between these organized crime stealing of these vehicles and these profits being put into violent activities such as homicide, such as gun running, such as the drug epidemic. You are seeing that intelligence, a strong connection between these two factors.
Yes, clearly. Even arson.
Yes or no? It's not a victimless crime. Stealing
auto
theft.
Non, tout à fait. Il y a des victimes.
No, there are victims. We're not just talking about auto theft. There are other losses.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Biddle, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much. That was a bizarre straw man because I don't think anyone here that I've heard has said this is a victimless crime. Monsieur Desmarais, you said maybe it was just something in the translation, but you're concerned about young people being released on bail without those that didn't have a criminal record. Is your recommendation that young people without a criminal record should be incarcerated pre-trial, before pre-trial? Is that something that should happen in all cases, or?
Non, écoutez.
No. I would say that every case is distinct, and there has to be a good assessment of repeat offenses. It shouldn't be automatic to keep every person in custody, but I think if we had a little more power as police forces, it would make things easier.
Thank you. There was some discussion about sentencing being minimal, and we've talked about it in the criminal code. Auto theft, I believe, has a maximum of 10 years, but I understand hearing from multiple police services that we're not seeing those sentences issued even in the most severe type of cases. My question is in respect to other sections of the criminal code with respect to continuing criminal enterprises. Are your police services, and it's to both of you, are your police services charging people under those sections and capturing the organized crime element of it to get those sentences higher due to the severity and the inclusion of organized crime?
Well, there are different types of investigations. There are the shorter terms and there are the longer term ones. When we investigate the longer term ones, when we're trying to dismantle a criminal organization, we're trying to acquire all the evidence to support charges, organized crime charges. In Quebec, our directeurs des poursuites criminelles et pénales are in charge of laying the charges, so it's not the police. So what we do is we give them all the evidence of that we've collected, and they decide on what charges are going to be laid.
I guess I only have a few seconds left, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Ms. Michaud, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 3 questions, so I will ask them quickly, given the short time I have. You talked about the importance of attacking people that are in charge of these export activities in the criminal world. We often hear that the CBSA works more on importing than in exporting, because it feels that it has less responsibility. Do you think that we need to change the mandate, especially because of the increase in these auto thefts? I imagine there are a lot of other things that are exported illegally as well. Do you think that the CBSA mandate needs to be changed so that it deals more with what is exported? Since 2018, we have been working with our partners in the Port of Montreal. We work with them every week, and the Sûreté du Québec and the GSP, and of course, there is a lot more scope for inspecting imported goods, and less is done for export goods, and that's why we have fewer searches. I would add that since March 2022, we've been cooperating in partnership with the Montreal Police and the CBSA to search containers, and one of our targets is to dismantle the activities coming into the port. With respect to criminal organizations and people at all levels for transporting and exporting, do they need inside help? No, we don't see that in our investigations. What we need to do is to increase the capacity to search containers. You talked about young people who are arrested that are involved in organized crime organizations. Do you think that we should increase, or there's some talk of the need to increase sentences, have minimum sentences and so on? Do you find that the length of the sentence is actually something that affects these people? Do you think young people understand about this when they get involved? Well, they certainly are aware. They find that they that the situation is such that they aren't in great danger, and we need to focus on this.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll just limit myself to one question, and I'll invite both of you to weigh in. So in our first hour of today's meeting, we heard from representatives of the Montreal Port Authority, and they were discussing some of the legislative limitations that they have. And of course, our ports are creatures of the federal government. They operate under federal government mandate. Transport Canada is a federal agency that's also heavily involved. I guess from your perspective, when you look at the important role that port authorities play in Canada, do you think it would be helpful for this committee to recommend some legislative changes do you think it would be helpful in your investigations to have port authorities to have a more active role in this? Do you see any limitations in what their current role is and what you wish that they could have in terms of more inspections of containers, et cetera? I just want to get your perspective on that.
Well, I can start. One of the recommendations of our president of the ADPQ, M. Brochet, was address of the declaration and the manifest. So have some kind of legislation concerning that, because we know that the manifest can be changed once so that's one of the aspects, and we agree with that as well. That's another aspect that could be helpful, as you said. And I think that we have to continue working at Projet Recherché in our investigations, and I know the SPVM as well. We all work closely with CBSA, but also with the Port Authority of Montreal. So I think it's important to keep that line of communication going up and helping. And I think addressing as Mr. Brochet said, addressing the manifest problematic would be definitely helpful.
Oui, pour compléter.
Well, I would just add to what Mr. Patnaud said by adding that we should have a longer period, perhaps 72 hours, where that information in the manifest is available to police officers, and we could do more investigations earlier.
Thank you, and thank you to our witnesses. Very informative. We appreciate it. Just before the meeting, before we get to the adjournment, I wanted to mention that don't forget the Ukrainian delegation's coming in right after. And also, Mr. Caputo, you wanted to raise something.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll be fairly brief. My understanding, and I recognize I'm new to the committee here, is that Mr. Shifke and Madame Michaud have both suggested that we have further witnesses appear. I'm wondering if there is an appetite for the committee, with unanimous consent, to extend this study for 2 extra meetings, given I think that we would be prepared to put forward some more witnesses as well. I'm not sure if anybody wants to discuss that at this point.
Mr. Chair, it's my understanding that you are still having trouble filling all of the existing meeting spots with witnesses, so I think we can accommodate, we still have 2 more meetings, I believe. Is that correct?
We have 2 more meetings. One meeting is already full, but waiting some invitations. And the last meeting, the 6th one, both ministers are invited.
But there would be a second panel then, so we could have room for Madame Michaud's would be for the Minister of Transport, that would be then accommodated there. Mr. Shifke has suggested one. If the Conservatives would like to suggest one, and the NDP, we could fit it in the second panel. And I don't think 2 extra meetings when we've had panels with only 2 or 3 witnesses, we can accommodate within.
Mr. Shipley, please.
I'll just quickly, because I know we do have other things to get going on too. I think we've learned a lot in this study. I think Mr. Shifke brought up some good points. He missed quite a few manufacturers. I know we had Toyota stay after one meeting. It was incredibly informative. I know it was a cold day, but I went out to the parking lot with them. It was good, so we learned a lot. I don't want to rush through this. I want to do this properly. I know Ms. Michaud mentioned perhaps we could have some staff, not just the minister from that area, also attend. I think 2 meetings is very reasonable. We're not adding a lot there. This has been a very informative study.
Can I make a suggestion? Can you leave it with the clerk and I, and we'll take whoever your requests for witnesses are and see if we can build it into an appropriate schedule. Is that okay? And if it's 2, it's 2. If it's 3, it's 3. Doesn't matter to me. So is that okay, Mr. Caputo? Oh, Ms. Michaud, sorry.
Oui, évidemment, merci.
Well, thank you for that suggestion. I proposed this study, so I'm very pleased to see the idea of prolonging it. Yeah. Do you want to hear their suggestions today? And then if it works, we could add them. Is that the idea?
Oui, c'est quelque chose qui peut être fait.
Yes, this is something we could do. I know that in your list, not all witnesses were selected, only some of them. So it could be either new witnesses or ones that were already on the list.
Ms. O'Connell, please.
First of all, just to clarify, we don't just accept any amount of witnesses. It has to be proportional. So I think if there is an opportunity to add 1 or 2, we can submit additional names, but we're not agreeing at this point to necessarily add more meetings, and frankly, conversations about witnesses and meetings would be done in camera. So if we're going to have that further conversation, we can. But we can see what space is available, and then we can determine if there is unanimous consent.
Thank you. Mr. Motz, please.
I think if you look at the witness list that was submitted and the witnesses that have been here, I believe that all parties still have witnesses that are on that list that could come, that we don't have to add anybody new to it. So we do have a lot of, other than the odd 1 or 2, but there's a lot of witnesses there that we can still call that are on the list already.
Okay. Motion to adjourn. Adjourned.